So this is a daunting time for me. It's really unfair to follow Rav Haber. It's really unfair to follow Rav Haber after we had yesterday also. Whatever. It's also unfair that I should have to talk about this topic. I was trying to organize this that everyone else should speak and then I shouldn't have to do anything. So I'm sorry. When Schoolmaker and I were discussing what to do for these days of Emuna, although things kind of got flipped, but the idea was to talk about one day of more Emuna Bitachon, classic Emuna, and one day of Emunas Chachamim. Halacha process. That was Rabbi Wolf yesterday. Okay, Rabbi Cohen wasn't able to make it today. And I think one of the things that Rabbi Wolf touched on, but I want to develop a little bit more, is the idea of rabbinic authority, of Gedolim. How do we relate to Gedolim? What is this idea we hear about Gedolim? Do we need to listen to Gedolim? Etc. I want to look at this through the eyes of Rishonim. In halacha, in hashkafa as well, I think we'll see that really these things blend together. It's a good example, a good case study of how those two areas of our worlds are really inextricably linked. You can't say, my hashkafa is X, and ignore the halacha. The hashkafa flows from the halacha over here, as I hope we'll see. So, maybe just one other introductory point. Keep expectations low. It's always good. But this is a topic which many people have spoken about, many people have written about. I'm not convinced you will find any chidushim in what we're going to say over here. But maybe just a chazar is good. Maybe also chidush is simply in presentation. Just to see, maybe just the way we're going to present it, even if no chidushim of content, but just presentation itself could be helpful just to crystallize it. So, not to be intimidated, we won't read every single word inside. This is a condensed packet. I'm just saying. So we have a pasuk in Parshas Shoftim in certain one. Ki palim chadavar lemishpat. When you're unsure about something, bein dam ledam, bein din ledin, bein nega lenega. In any area of halacha, the Gemara learns from here that there are three different areas of halacha. Dam ledam would be isser v'heter, ritual law. Din ledin would be choshin mishpat, monetary law, and nega lenega would be tariffs. The Gemara learns there are three primary areas of halacha, but okay. We should go to the place Hashem chooses, the Beis Hamikdash, the center of halacha. We'll go to the shoftim, the judges, the leadership, and they'll tell us what to do. And not only will they tell us what to do, but now we have a new chiddush. You'll do it, right? Pasuk Yud Test told us they'll tell us what to do. Pasuk Yud then says Vasisa, you will do it. This is a command. And Pasuk Yud Aleph Al Piatar Shar Yerucha Al Mishpat Shar Yom Melucha. Whatever they say, Taseh, you should do. Lo Sasu Min Adavar Shar Yilucha Yimisol. You shouldn't sway. You shouldn't move off of what they tell you to do. So what we have and we'll see codified are two mitzvahs over here. We have mitzvah number one to listen, positive command, and we have an isser not to listen. Two different things. I'd like to understand through the Rishonim, what does that refer to? Maybe let's start with a more basic question. Who does that refer to? Right? You have to listen to them. Who is the them, and what do I have to listen to them about? Because if we're talking about the role of rabbinic authority, the role of Gedolim, so, Gedolim told me that his favorite ice cream is vanilla. I can't ever order chocolate anymore because he said, right? They said, and it's something. No. Ice cream is not. But who you cheer for in the ball game? That's a real psak already. So who's the they? So we'll see a number of shittas in Rishonim. Pretty unclear, I think, how we paskin, but that's a secondary point for now. So we have in source number 2 the Sefer Chinuch. Sefer Chinuch collects mitzvahs according to the parsha, and he has two mitzvahs back to back, Taf Tzadi Hey, Taf Tzadi Vav, because as we pointed out, there are two different mitzvahs. So, note what he says in source number 2. Lishma b'kol bezdin hagadol. We should listen to the bezdin hagadol, Sanhedrin, in the Beis Hamikdash. V'lasas kol mashi yitzavo isanu. We should listen to whatever they tell us to do. B'darchei Torah, b'eser muter, b'tamei Torah, v'chei v'pater, b'chol davar sheyir lahem, shu chizuk v'tikim b'daseinu. Whatever they think is important for religious purposes. Pretty, broad mandate they've got over here. Whatever they think, we have to listen. That's Vasisa. And then if you go to the end of the third line over here in source number 2, ve'ein hefresh bazet, there's no distinction. Bein hadavar she'era'u heim midaitam, whether the idea they were promulgating is an idea that they came up with, or they use hermeneutical principles to derive this halacha from the psukim, or they tell you this is Kabbalah, or whatever they think. Says Sefer Chinuch, there is no distinction. What the Sefer Chinuch is telling us is that there's a mitzvah midaraisa to listen to them in whatever they are telling you. Whatever. Maybe vanilla ice cream. And then he says in the next paragraph, right, the structure of the Sefer Chinuch is he'll always tell you, when is this mitzvah applicable? To whom is it applicable? So he says, Nahegis mitzvazu bizman beis hagada b'Yerushalayim b'schar mitkevos. This mitzvah is applicable at the time that there is a Beis Hamikdash. Oh, that makes sense. Pasuk was talking about Kiv Haladav. When we were unsure, you go to the place, Beis Hamikdash. Ubechal mitzvah, and including this mitzvah towards the end of the line, Gam ken lishma v'lasas, also to listen, to act, b'chol zman uzman kemitzvah hashofet. In every generation, says the Sefer Chinuch, including this mitzvah, is to listen to the leaders. Kolomer, this means hachacham hagadol asher yebeneinu b'zmanenu. The greatest rabbi, there's a mitzvah midaraisa to listen to his psak of vanilla ice cream. This is a pretty broad understanding of this mitzvah. But this is the Sefer Chinuch's approach. So approach number 1, Sefer Chinuch, the mitzvah applies to all generations. Sefer Chinuch is living 700-800 years ago. So he's living in a post-Beis Hamikdash reality. He's living in a reality that is not the Gemara. He's not talking about Tanaim or Amoraim. He's talking about his era. And even though we artificially draw lines between Rishonim and Achronim, but fundamentally there's no difference, right? It's certainly all post-Talmudic. And he says this mitzvah midaraisa applies. So taking the Sefer Chinuch's logic, his psak then would be applicable today. We would have a mitzvah midaraisa today to listen to the Chachamim on whatever they say. Yeah.
The way he phrases it in the singular, hachacham hagadol.
Yeah.
So would that mean only if there's a clear door in our generation?
So I don't think so. I think it's a nice point. I want to come back to it. I think where he's coming from is his raya that he quotes afterwards is a Gemara in Rosh Hashanah about Yiftach b'dara k'shmol b'dara. So it's singular there. So I think that's where he's coming from. But I think what you're raising could be relevant in I say in a few minutes, but it might be more than a few. Okay. That's mitzvah deraisa. That's approach number 1. In the very next mitzvah, in source number 3. Now we discuss the positive mitzvah. Says the Sefer Chinuch, but there's an isser as well. So over here, the Sefer Chinuch gives us a little svara. Right? Remember the Sefer Chinuch's structure? He always gives you misharshe mitzvah, the hashkafic underpinnings of the mitzvah. So he says, if you look in the source number 3, the 4th line, misharshe mitzvah, the mitzvah not to sway from the words of the Chamim, lefisha deus b'nei adam chalukin zeh mizeh. We're never all going to come to the same conclusion, right? 2 Jews, 3 opinions. And Hashem knows. Were it that Hashem would say, you know what, you decide on your own, and you decide on your own, and you decide on your own, well, everyone's going to have their own interpretation. And everyone is going to have a machlokes with everyone else, but mashmos and mitzvahs in basic things. And it will look as if, chas v'shalom, there are multiple Torahs, because everyone's going to be doing something different. And therefore, says the Sefer Chinuch, Al Kain, just skipping a little bit, Elokeinu shuhu adon kol chachmas hishlim tarasenu taras emes ima mitzvahs. So what did Hashem put into the system of mitzvahs? This mitzvah to not sway from the chamim. So we'll have unified psak. That's the goal. We're talking about the ideal, which may be a little bit related to what Josh was saying in terms of a single figure. Ubechol dor vador. The first word on the line is vidor. If you're following, in every generation, gam ken shenishma el hachachamim. In every generation, he's being consistent. In every generation, when you have the leaders of that generation, here it's in plural, hanimtsoim shekiblu divreim v'shasu mayim misifreim. They drank the waters of early generations. V'yagu kamigias. They worked hard. Yamim leilos, days and nights. Lahavim unmek milehem uplias deoseim. They tried to understand the depths of Torah. Im haskama hazois nechavin el derech emes, and they're trying to figure out what is the truth. What does Hashem want over here? That's what we have to listen to. Says the Sefer Chinuch. Why? Because it reduces possibility of machlokes and of getting it wrong. We do not believe in papal infallibility. Certainly we don't believe in papal infallibility. But we don't believe in rabbinic infallibility either. But says the Sefer Chinuch, they might be wrong. But let's at least minimize the mistakes. In other words, there could be. What are the odds? What are the odds that Rav Chaim Kanievsky got it wrong versus I got it wrong? Odds are better that I got it wrong. If you're a betting man, who would you bet on to get it wrong? Don't flatter me. So this is approach number one. Says the Sefer Chinuch, there's a mitzvah midaraisa, positive and negative, to listen to the Chachamim, to not sway from the Chachamim, and he says it's in every generation. Therefore, that should be applicable today. And other point, he has a very broad mandate, seems to be applicable to everything. Approach number one, Sefer Chinuch. Approach number two is the Ran. The Ran has a hashkafic work, philosophical work, the Drush Ran. So he says in source number 4, he takes a similar approach to the Sefer Chinuch, which with a little bit of a twist. He says, Atshuva bazeh, the answer is, question is unimportant for us right now. Shenistavinu lishma Sanhedrin mishnei dvarim. We have to listen to the Sanhedrin in two spheres. One is classic Torah, psak, drashology, etc. Second, whatever they decide is an appropriate public policy. And whatever comes after them, we have to listen. And at the end, I'll maybe summarize just because we want to move a little bit. He says, but all future generations, in other words, that all future rabbinic bodies or rabbinic personalities that are not the Sanhedrin, that are not in the Beis Hamikdash, that's midrabanan, you listen to them. So, just to be clear so far, the Sefer Chinuch is the mitzvah midaraisa, the broadest mandate. The Ran believes the mandate is the same, whatever they think. The only difference is to who does this apply. The Ran believes on a daraisa level, this only applies to the Sanhedrin in the Beis Hamikdash. Whereas outside of the Beis Hamikdash, i.e. nowadays, it would be a mitzvah midrabanan. According to the Sefer Chinuch, it's even a mitzvah midaraisa. Now, I don't know about you, but I think we try and keep rabbinic mitzvahs as well. So, in practice, there shouldn't be such an nafkamina between the Sefer Chinuch and the Ran, in the sense that, well, we listen to the Chachamim in what they say, in what their opinion is. Even if it's not, this is the drasha. Seems to be what the Ran's saying. Okay. There's a curious Ramban. I don't want to spend so much time on the Ramban. The Rambam, we know, was supremely organized. The Rambam set out to write a sefer encompassing all areas of halacha, but the Rambam said, before I do that, I have to write a introductory work before I write my actual work. So he said, so you have to write a sefer mitzvahs outlining, detailing what are the 613 mitzvahs, so then you'll know what are the mitzvahs that I'm discussing in the halachas. And then the Rambam says, but I can't just start writing a work like that. I have to write an introductory work to the introductory work. Because how did I know that to count these mitzvahs as 613 and not include these mitzvahs and not those mitzvahs? So the Rambam wrote another work, the Shorashim, where he details what are the rules he uses to count. So on that sefer, introduction to the introduction, the Ramban has argues. And that's where the Ramban we might be familiar with in terms of the Ramban maybe about a famous machlokes about tefillah, a famous machlokes about Eretz Yisrael, etc. So in the course of this, I'm not going to read inside. The Ramban kind of pushes aside and says, I'm not so sure there's this whole idea to not listen to the Chachamim. Like, I don't really understand this. There's a lot to say about this Ramban. I'll just share with you a piece in source number 6 from Rav Chanan Wasserman. Rav Chanan was a prime Talmud of both Rav Chaim Brisker and of the Chofetz Chaim, one of the great Gedolim in pre-war Europe. And he has a sefer. It was printed separately originally. Now it's put together with his classic Sfarim called Divrei Sofrim, where he discusses all sorts of issues related to Masara, drashas, halachic process type of things. It's not an organized sefer in terms of these are the headaches. It's a lomdisha sefer, but that's what he's trying to drive at. And what he wants to say, which I think is interesting, if nothing else, is that in the Ramban's view, this mitzvah is a mitzvah to listen to the Chachamim as they represent the Ratzon Hashem. In other words, there may not be a specific mitzvah to listen to them because of the content, but because of the desire that they have to represent the Ratzon Hashem. That's what we have an obligation to do. Okay? I don't want to spend too much time on that if that doesn't make perfect sense. I want to come to the Rambam. The Rambam, I think, is significant. The Rambam plays a major role in this whole conversation. So let's go to source number 7. The Rambam, as we said, has a Sefer Mitzvahs where he counts mitzvahs. So he counts in source number 7, mitzvah 174. Pause the mitzvah 174. He says, "Ha-mitzvah kuf ein dal 174. He shitzivanu lishma lebezin agadol. We have a mitzvah to listen to the bezin in Yerushalayim. Velasas kol masha yitzave ba mitzvah. We have to listen to whatever they tell us. Vein hevda bazeh bein hadavar sheyizvaruhu or davar sheyatzua behekesh." And says the Rambam, there's no difference between a mitzvah comment that the Sanhedrin in Yerushalayim in the Beis Hamikdash has, whether it's a pasuk, whether they've derived it based on Yud Gimel Midos of Rabbi Shmuel, whether they have a svara to derive it. It's all the same. Fine. So that's mitzvah. First part of the mitzvah for the Rambam. Let's just read one other, and then we'll try and put the Rambam's approach together, or begin to. Source number 8. But mitzvah shin yud beis. Now we're in the negatives. Shisiranu mechaluk al bale kabbalah alei mashalom. We have a mitzvah not to disagree, to argue with the bale kabbalah. Bale kabbalah does not mean mysticism over here. Bale kabbalah means those who have a received tradition. We cannot argue with them. Umatsasa umimitzvahs b'maiseh Torah v'hu amru, and then he quotes our pasuk losasa. So there's a few interesting things to note over here. Remember we asked the question, who does this apply to? So if you look in source number 7, the Rambam says he only talks about the Bezdin Hagadol, the great Bezdin. That's the Sanhedrin. Maybe according to the Rambam, it's not applicable at all nowadays. I don't have to listen to anyone because there's no mitzvah. Here Yibana, Beit Mikdash, Beis Mikdash comes down tomorrow. So look at that. So we now have to start listening to the rabbis again. But till then, we're free agents. Seems to be reflected in the Rambam in the Yad HaChazaka, source number 9. The Rambam says, Bezin Agadol should be Yerushalayim, the Sanhedrin. Hem Ikir Torah Sheba'al Peh. They are the centerpiece of Torah Sheba'al Peh. Vehem Amudei HaHara'ah. They are the pillars of psak, of teaching. Umehem Choku Mishpat Yosef L'Chol Yisrael. That's where tradition emanates from. And he goes on to say, that's what the Torah describes as Al Pia Torah Sheyerucha. You have to listen to them. And he says, if you don't listen to them, so then it's perhaps a punishable offense. So the Rambam seems to be consistent. There is no mitzvah nowadays to listen to the Chachamim. Right? Let's try and summarize. Let's leave the Ramban aside. Ramban is interesting, but not for now. Sefer Chinuch, mitzvah midaraisa, nowadays everything. Mitzvah the Ran, nowadays mitzvah midrabanan, but everything. Rambam, not nowadays, and perhaps not everything. Right? The Rambam seems to only talk about halacha, very limited mandate. So when we talk about Gedolim, this is going to be very important. Who are these Gedolim? I'm a Rambamnik. Sorry, Gedolim. Doesn't matter. You're in the Sanhedrin? Great, show me your credentials. Otherwise, take a hike. I don't recommend saying that. But Now, we can bolster this idea of the Rambam. Source number 10, there's a Gemara in Bav Metzia. Gemara in Bav Metzia says, Ravina, Rav Ashi v'Ravina, Sof Hara. Ravina and Rav Ashi are the editors, compilers, redactors of the Gemara. They are the end of the period, says the Gemara, of Hara, of transmission. After that, kaput, that's it. Well, it makes a lot of sense then that the Gemara is putting a cap on something. Beyond that, we don't have the ability to relate to them in the same way. Now, this is not exactly what the Rambam says, because the Rambam seems to refer only to the Bezdin HaGadol in Yerushalayim, but the idea of putting a cap on it, putting a limitation, and beyond that, the rules don't apply in the same way, that we could find a support to that already in this Gemara in Bav Metzia. Okay. We're going to go out of order over here, just to keep things interesting. So that's one element of our at least the building blocks of this conversation. The mitzvah, the isser, lo sasur, don't sway, don't abandon what the Chum say. Mitzvah midaraisa to listen to them, who's to them. Now let's come to what people talk about nowadays. Das Torah. We've heard this phrase before, Das Torah. So there was a Rosh Shiva, Rav Zelik Epstein, Rosh Shiva in Shari Torah in New York. So they once asked him something about, I forget what the issue was, and he provided his answer, and they said, but what about Das Torah? So he smiled and he said, I was born before Das Torah was invented. Cute line. Because he's right. Das Torah comes up in the Gemara. I gave you the Gemara, we're not going to read inside even, because it's really not worth it from the perspective of Das Torah, not from the perspective of learning Gemara. Because the Gemara is talking about Giranasha, the sciatic nerve. Does it apply only on one leg or both legs? And the Gemara says, well, how do you know that answer? Is it Das Nota, you're inclined to it? Is it Das Torah? It doesn't mean the way that contemporary authors will use Das Torah. Today, people will use Das Torah as Rabbi knows all. Something like that? Yeah. That's not what the Gemara is using. Chazal don't know about Das Torah like that. I'm not saying they don't necessarily, and that's part of our question. I'm not saying that Chazal would disagree with the concept, but the label Das Torah, if you would go up to Ravina or Rav Ashi and say, what's your view in Das Torah? They would say like Gemara and Chulin. No one would know anything about this. There's another term that people throw around today. We have Mishnah Pirkei Avos, this is number 16, which stated outside, that there are 48 Dvarim that you acquire the Torah with. One is Emunas Chachamim. That was our tie-in to our days of Emuna. Faith in our sages. So what does that mean? Is there kfir involved over here? So I think it's important to understand this a little bit, because even if we say that halachically I'm not obligated to listen to the Gedolim, let's assume we go like the Rambam for now. Right? According to the Chinuch, you're stuck. So conveniently, you're a Rambam man, so I don't have to listen. Convenient. But what about Das Torah? What about Emunas Chachamim? Wouldn't that, force us, so to speak, not mandating, but force us to listen? So we have to understand what is Das Torah? What is Emunas Chachamim? So the sources which I gave you are 20th century sources. As I said, because no one really discussed this before. In this way, no one was really discussing this. That doesn't mean that it's an illegitimate concept. Some people would say, well, if it wasn't discussed, must be it's illegitimate. I don't understand that. Electricity wasn't discussed, by the Rambam, so it must be that electricity is, has no bearing in halacha. I just fundamentally disagree with that. It didn't come up, but it doesn't mean that they didn't believe it. So there's a source that many quote. I'm not sure that it's the most central source, but I gave it to you anyways. They put together a sefer called Chavos Chaim al Torah, And then bottom there they have the footnotes. I forget the person who wrote it right now. So in source number 17, you have this piece from I forget who it is, a Talmud of the Chafetz Chaim. And he says, Hu haya omer, describe the Chafetz Chaim. The Chafetz Chaim used to say, Shemisha daito das Torah, a person whose mind can be labeled as das Torah, yochel lifter kol bayis ha'olam b'chlal u'prat. He could solve all the world's problems if he just had das Torah. Ela shetnai hisna. But the Chafetz Chaim said there's one condition. Shad das Torah tiet slula. It has to be clear. Bli eza pnia or netia koshi. You can't be involved in anything else. You can't be looking at anything else, checking the WhatsApps. If you have a person who has the das Torah, ella shemur reves afilu ma'at im deos acheros mina shuk mina italios. A person has das Torah; they've risen to that level, but they're also involved in the newspapers or the WhatsApps. Hari das Torah achur. Then it's not clear anymore, and then he's not able to solve the world's problems. Chafetz Chaim puts the idea of das Torah on a pedestal. Oh, if you got das Torah, you can solve all the world's problems. Nebuch, we don't have anyone that has achieved that level because they haven't achieved that pristine state. There's a letter from Rav Dessler in the Michtav Melio. This letter, there have been articles and articles written about this letter. Let's give some of the historical background, because I think the historical background is important over here. Rav Dessler makes it out of Europe and doesn't really know what's happening. It's clear he doesn't know what's happening. They point this out in the footnotes, because he refers to Rav Chana Wasserman, who we quoted earlier, as Shlita. Rav Chana Wasserman was dead already at this point. He didn't know that he was dead yet. So he says, well, Chazaka. I knew that Rav Chana was alive, so I'm going to assume that he's alive. So he writes Shlita, but he was no longer alive at this point. The questioner, we don't know exactly what the questioner said, the person who sent him the letter, but it must have been something along the lines of, why are the Gedolim so stupid? Are they not telling Klal Yisrael for decades right now to go to Eretz Yisrael where will they be safe? Why do they tell them to stay in Eastern Europe so the Nazis could come get them? Das Torah means nothing. Why should we have Emunas Chachamim? That was the kasha. If you put Emunas Chachamim, Das Torah on a pedestal, so then, well, why when countless people in the 20s, in the 30s, in the 40s even, in the war, went to Gedolim, and the Gedolim said, don't leave Europe. Go to America, the Treif of Medina, how can you do that? You go to Eretz Yisrael with the Zionists, how are you going to do that? Stay in Europe, everything will be safe. Everything will be great. And look what happened. Or look what's happening. That's right in the middle of the war. That's the context over here. They point out, in a footnote, the editors of Aryeh Carmel, that the assumption of the questioner is not necessarily a great question. Because, well, in their opinion, it's not a great assumption. Because, who was it, Rommel? Was this close to taking over Eretz Yisrael, just in North Africa? And then everyone in Eretz Yisrael would have been in the exact same position in Europe. It was just by miraculous feats that Rommel didn't make it to Eretz Yisrael. That's their interpretation of the war. We're not getting into that right now. But the reason that I'm mentioning is because they're saying that the assumption is not a fair assumption. The assumption of the questioner is, if they just would have told the Klal Yisrael to come to Eretz Yisrael, everything would have been safe. And they say, well, not necessarily, because it was just through a miracle. It wasn't through any natural means. But okay. So, Rav Dessler. Let's start in 18. I gave you the whole letter. We will not read the whole letter inside, but I gave you the whole letter because I think it's an important letter to be aware of. He says, I see that you, the person who's writing to me, believes ki kol gedolei Yisrael asher maaseim hayu l'shem shemayim v'ga'onei haseich v'adir hatzedakos gam yachad. Everyone who is well-intentioned, asher bli safek b'chol mishpateim u'piskei dinim haya Hashem nitzav b'adas elokim, that whatever they said, Hashem was with them. K'mo b'dor ha'avar, like the previous generation, Chafetz Chaim, Vagan, Rav Chaim Ozer, Rav Chaim Brisker, Rav Baruch Ber, V'od V'od. Just skipping a little, I apologize, I don't have a way to mark it off, but maybe 6 lines down in this first paragraph. Kulam yitu tos gemura. Everyone made a mistake. Lo te ksos b'Yisrael. So it says Rav Dessler, I understand that this is what you think. They made a mistake. The Gedolim made a mistake in their assessment of the political landscape of where Klal Yisrael should go. And Rav Dessler says, also lishma dvarim kele. We can't say that. Kol shkein l'amram. You can't hear it. You can't say it. Im lo shehavanti asher shama ma'acherim hanikram b'nei Torah. If I wouldn't have heard that people who call themselves b'nei Torah have similar sentiments, says Rav Dessler, I wouldn't even grace this with a response. But the fact that there could be people who are b'nei Torah who have such sentiments, he says I have to respond. Kodem kol, second paragraph over here. Kodem kol davar omer lamar ki eizem ha'geonim halalu zachisa l'das panim. Says Rav Dessler, I knew these people face to face. There were isim ba'asifas binyanim Klal Yisrael. Rav Chaim Brisker, Rav Chaim Ozer, all the Gedolim there. Says Rav Dessler, I had a relationship with them. I saw them up close. I can testify, he says, even for our puny brains, says Rav Dessler, you would understand how great they were. They understood the depths of every issue. Misha ra asifosehem ra b'chushki al kopanim b'shasha choshvu mashvosam. He says, whenever they were thinking, you saw Hashem was with them. And therefore, says Rav Dessler, he goes on, but we'll try and summarize. Therefore, says Rav Dessler, you can't say this. So, this approach of Rav Dessler raises a bunch of questions. So, Hashem was with the Gedolim, and therefore, the right psak was stay in Europe. That seems to be what Rav Dessler is saying. The debate about this letter is Rav Dessler ascribing some sort of supernatural powers to Gedolim? Hashem's with them. Hashem's guiding everything. So this will become relevant if we believe that to be true, if we take that approach in reading Rav Dessler's letter. So then, wherever we would have Gedolim of that caliber, who we see Elohim Shemaim, they understand the depths, you are around them, etc. So we would say they're guided by Hashem. Well, if they're guided by Hashem, then there's no chance you can argue with them in any way. Even if you go like the Rambam, that there's no halachic imperative to. How can you argue with what is clearly Hashem's will? And Rav Dessler could have gotten out of this, just to use a little Gemara analysis over here. There's another way to answer this kasha. Gedolim have certain hashgacha in their learning and dealing with things, but maybe not in all areas. Remember, we talked about what is the mandate of the Beis Din, which Gedolim. So Rav Dessler could have said, you know what? When it comes to psak halacha, so Rav Chaim Ozer, everything he says is emes, by definition. When it comes to political analysis, so then he's someone else with political analysis. Rav Dessler does not go that way. He doesn't make that chiluk. That's important to note. You know who else goes like this? At least at a certain point, Rav Soloveitchik. One of Rav Soloveitchik's gifts, both in thought and in presentation as an orator, was giving a hesped, giving eulogy. If you ever want to study a unique window into Jewish thought, check out Rav Soloveitchik's eulogies. Because what he does is he takes a person and he captures their essence and he builds a whole elaborate mahalach of hashkafa around it, and he presents it beautifully. The story, background to this piece, is that 1940, I forget, 1, 2, something like that, Rav Chaim Ozer Grudzinski, the Gadol Hador, undisputed Gadol Hador in Vilna, was nifter. Soloveitchik at that time was a member, somewhere, a vice president, I don't know, something, of the Agudas Yisrael. He was in America already, and he was asked to give a hesped at the Agudas Yisrael convention for the Gadol Hador of Chaim Ozer. Why was Rav Soloveitchik asked? He was one of the younger members because he knew Rav Chaim Ozer personally. He had been in Europe, a few years prior. So he gives a beautiful, beautiful hesped. Maybe we'll read some of it inside. Source number 19. He says, "Shnei begadim mibigdei kohen gadol hudgeshu biyoser." There are two pieces of clothing that jump out at us when it comes to the kohen gadol: hatzitz v'achoshen. The tzitz is, I don't know what it's called in English. I call it the tiara. Everyone knows what I'm talking about? Tiara. I don't know what else to call it. What? Exactly. I'm going to call it a tiara. And the choshen is the breastplate. Yeah. So far so good. Fine. So those are two unique begadim of the kohen gadol. So he says, skipping down, Hatzitz, Hayimeratz al Tumus. Tzitz was there. Every part of the begadim of the Kohen Gadol would achieve some sort of atonement for Klal Yisrael. What was the tzitz? Tumah. Hatzitz, it's where it's bolded a few lines in a row. Hatzitz Hayekulo Kodesh Lashem. On the tiara is written Kodesh Lashem. It's all about kedusha. Hatzitz Hayenosun al Mitzcho Shel Aaron. It was on the forehead. Keneged Merkas HaSeichel Vadas. So it says Rav Soloveitchik, the tzitz Kodesh Lashem, that's up here. That's your seichel, that's your intellect. Hachoshen, the breastplate, Hayal Lev Aaron, that's on your heart. Merkas HaAva v'Achi B'L Yisrael, that's where you feel the love for Klal Yisrael. Kol Shemas HaShvatim HaYecharusin Alav, the names of all the Shvatim were carved there. V'Kosav Kara Osen Choshen and Mishpat. So we have two things, says Rav Soloveitchik, that embody the Kohen Gadol: the intellect and the heart. And he says that this is the model of leadership, that you cannot separate the intellect from the heart. The intellect, where we paskin shilas from, and the way you feel people and you speak to their needs, that's the same person, says Rav Soloveitchik. It's not two different people. There's no separation of church and state, I'm sorry. It's the same person. The Kohen Gadol is the model of leadership. And said Rav Soloveitchik, that was Rav Chaim Ozer. Rav Chaim Ozer was the Gadol Ador, was the Posek Ador, everyone was paskin shilas. And he felt for people, and he cried with people, and he gave advice to people, and he analyzed. So says Rav Soloveitchik, that goes together. Now notice what Rav Soloveitchik has done. He's created a model where the leader encompasses both psak halacha and the feelings, the analysis of the people at the same time. This is the Rav Dessler approach. This is he doesn't use the words because he's pre-Das Torah, but this is the Das Torah approach. The Kohen Gadol, as a model of leadership, embodies both these qualities. Again, there are many articles that discuss this piece as well, because later in life, Rav Soloveitchik seems to have switched gears a little bit, and that's going to be important for us. I gave you a piece over here in source number 20. I apologize, it's in English, but it's a translation from Yiddish anyways. So, assuming that Yiddish wouldn't help most of us, so if we're reading translation anyway, so we might as well read it in English. I hope that's okay with everyone. I hope you don't throw me out. Soloveitchik, we described when he gave the hesped for Rav Chaim Ozer, was a card-carrying member of the Agudas Yisrael, let's call that the more Haredi world. And then at a certain point, he joined and became the leader, really, in many ways, of the Mizrahi movement, the Dati Leumi world. Kind of. Dati Leumi from Chutz La'aretz. So I don't know what to call that. And he used to give a landmark drasha at the Mizrahi convention every year. Again, Mizrahi Dati Leumi convention in Yiddish. So try and figure that one out. And he gave over here. Maybe let's skip to the second page, in source number 20. He says, God handed over technical legal matters to the authority of the sages, to rule on what is clean and what is unclean, to decide between obligation and exemption, forbidden and permitted. But in historical questions, not those related to the legal status of ovens, food, or determination of fixed monetary obligations, but those related to the destiny of the eternal people, God himself decides as to whose interpretation shall become law, meaning the historical development. Everyone follows that? So let's say it again. Okay? When it comes to psak halacha, that's firmly in the realm of the chachamim. When it comes to analysis, politics, here he's describing Zionism. So, what side of history are you on? Are you on the right side or not? That's not Chachamim. That's Hashem Himself decides. And now, this is a point that Rabbi Soloveitchik feels strongly about, but I'm noting, even though this is not our topic, it could certainly be analyzed. He says that clearly the Zionists are on the right side of history and the anti-Zionists are on the wrong side of history. That is clearly a debated statement. That's not our issue for right now. Okay, so let's not get bogged down in that one. But I'm noting, this is I forget the year, I should have looked it up, but this drasha to the Mizrachi Convention certainly is after the Hesped for Rav Chaim Ozer. So Soloveitchik's thought clearly changed a little bit. Now, whether we go with the most extreme formulation of Das Torah, the Gedolim know everything because of some divine inspiration. Where would that come from? Why should that be? How do you explain that? So, there's a Gemara in Masechtas Baba Basra, in source number 21. Gemara says, Amar Meimar, the Chacham adif min Navi. You know who's even better than a Navi? Talmid Chacham. So, what's the simple pshat of that Gemara? If a Navi is here, and he's got, he's getting filled in by Hashem, so the Chacham's up here, where do you think he's getting filled in by? Well, that would seem to be a very, I think, reasonable basis for the argument that Das Torah is a real thing. Because Chacham's better than a Navi. You believe Nevi'im, right? Otherwise, that's Kfira, right? We learned about that one once. So, that would seem to make sense. The devil here is in the details. What exactly does this mean? Why is a Chacham adif min Navi? So, in the Chassan Sofer, in his Parish on Shas, in source number 22, on this Gemara, he says, Chacham adif min Navi. Why is a Chacham greater than a Navi? Parish, this means, Ha-hasago shemasik bechachmaso, what the Chacham is able to achieve, to grab hold of, b'havana v'aseichel, v'afal pishu me'ezer eloki. Even though he's getting a little help from Hashem, it doesn't all come from you. V'ruach chodesh v'chal chachmas elyonim mikol makom hu be'emtza kli chushav haruchnius haseichli u'mevin tamei shel dvarim oser chachma adifa lei minavi. The fact that I'm able to achieve this on my own, or somewhat on my own, that's what makes it better. Well, that just, cut us off at the knees in terms of Das Torah. Because how does the Chassan Sofer explain this Gemara? And the Ritva, I think, goes along similar lines. You worked for it. Why is a Chacham better than a Navi? Because he works for it. A Navi just zapped down, you're a Navi. Not exactly, right? If you look in Tanakh, there were schools of Nevi'im. But it's not the same work as being a Chacham. Get yourself in the right mood, you get the right music playing, and that's it. Chacham, every single shaila is a new work. You pull off all the svarim off the shelves, you get a stack up. So, does that mean that Gedolim, Das Torah, is has greater insight, clarity than Nevuah? No. Right? If you go with this pshat of the Gemara, it doesn't mean that. So, this might be at the root of this issue. How do you understand a Chacham is greater than a Navi? Because he's got greater clarity? When you go through the Torah, you achieve greater clarity? Or is it, you work hard, so working hard is greater than not working harder? I think this may underlie another issue, which is debated in the Rishonim. Is there such thing, perhaps, I'm not sure if our paper touched on this, is there such thing as psak halacha, as psak when it comes to non-halacha? Ice cream, vanilla ice cream is the best. Don't even try and give me anything else. Vanilla ice cream is the best, the psak. You want to be a b'diavad person and have chocolate? That's b'diavad, just let's admit it. So, says the Rambam, in the Parish Mishnah, source number 24, he says, Kfar Martilcha, I've already said, Lo Pam, not even one time, I've already said more than one time, Shim Nechliku Chachami Beis Hashkafa. If there's a machlokes in Hashkafa, V'dei she'ein tachlisa maisa, and there is no practical application to this. We have machlokes between the Ram and the Ramban about Olam Haba. the nafkamina? Not really. I mean, there will be a nafkamina, but it's not nafkamina for how I act. He says the Rambam, there is no psak then. The Rambam is of the opinion, seems to be at least, that when it comes to non-halachic matters, and here's a bit of an expanded definition of non-halachic meaning no nafkamina to it, so then you can't tell me there's a psak. You can debate today, tomorrow, who's the greatest ball player of all time. No psak. I mean, it's obvious, but there's no psak. The Ran, in the Drashas Ran, vehemently disagrees. Source number 26, we'll come back to the Tanya in a second. The Ran says, just like in the realm of Torah, psak, drashology, etc., we have a mitzvah, our mitzvah, going back Losasor, to listen to them, the Chamim, so too we are commanded, when it comes to Midrashim. Ooh, Agarata? Is that psak? So says the Ran, yes. This is not debated, according to the Ran. Right? That's a very important machlokes. When it comes to psak, when it comes to hashkafa, when it comes to agarata, non-halach sections of Gemara, is that psak or not? The Ram says, no. If there's no nafkamina, then why is it psak? Different ideas floating around. Whereas the Ram says, no. We have to listen to the Chamim. You can't disagree with that. In other words, maybe just to highlight the point. It's less surprising when it comes to in the Rambam if there's two opinions about what happened to Moshe Rabbeinu at this place, and there's two midrashim. What's more shocking, and you could read this into the Rambam, is could I disagree with Chazal about the interpretation of this episode when there's no practical ramification to it? Perhaps in the Rambam, yes. Because there's no practical ramification. It's not a psak. Whereas the Ran says, of course not. You cannot come up with your own interpretation of the conversation between Avram and Sarah after the Akedah. You can't come up with your... Chazal have an interpretation about that. You can't say anything about it. How authoritative are Chazal? What's the reach? So, a similar question. I think...
What about, I guess... Even if they have a more refined seichel, why would you not be allowed to go according to your own seichel, even if you're more likely to be wrong?
I think it comes back to, I think this issue is mamish related to two ways that we discussed to analyze that Gemara Bava Basra. What does it mean, Chacham Adif Minavi? If Chacham Adif Minavi means the Navi has direct revelation from Hashem, and the Chacham is even greater than that, so you're going to argue on an interpretation which is greater than Nevuah? That's crazy. You can't do that. That's the Ran. Whereas the Rambam might take the approach, no, you know why Chacham's greater than Navi? Because he works hard. Oh, so he works hard, fine. But that doesn't preclude the fact that I could get something. It doesn't mean he has 100% emes. If Nevuah is directly from Hashem, and you've got something above that, so of course that's 100% emes. You can't argue. So I think that's why I think that this is a related topic. So again, how do we relate to nowadays? Would we say similar things? Chacham adif min Navi mostly? Navi's over here, Talmidei Chachamim used to be up here, now they're up here, or just below, but it's pretty close, so how could you argue? Or should we say no? It's about hard work. You work hard also. Let's go back for a second. An issue we skipped over in the Rambam. Maybe his source is 12, 13, 14, anyone that's keeping score at home. We'll start with the Kesef Mishnah. It's not the Rambam, but Rabbi Schneider, you heard of him, he's kind of authoritative in Shulchan Aruch. He asks a very fundamental question. He says, why, something we take for granted, why don't Amoraim argue with Tanaim? So what would we say? They can't. What do you mean they can't? They can't say, I think you're wrong? They don't know those words? It's not in their vocabulary? Of course it is. What? They don't have a swipe card to get in. Like, what's going on over here? Why not? So the Kesef Mish's answer is because they agreed they're not going to. Meaning they handcuffed themselves. The Amoraim said, "We agree. Chain us down. We're not going to argue on the Tanaim." Technically, they could. Fascinating point, according to the Kesef Mishnah. Any generation can argue on another generation, but we have accepted upon ourselves not to. Why is this important? Because I think this fits into a broader approach that the Rambam has when it comes to the rabbinic authority. Let's look at source number 12, the Rambam's introduction to the Yad HaChazaka, the Mishnah Torah. He says, "V'chol bezdin she'amar achar Gemara." Remember we said the Gemara, Ravina Ravashi, Soifara, that's the end of formal psak. Something changed at that point. So the Rambam says, any bezdin, any rabbinic body that stands up after the Gemara, b'chol medina medina, v'gazar ohiskino ohinig, l'bnei b'naseinu, or l'bnei medinas rabos, whether they make a psak just for this area, whether they make a psak for many areas, lo pashtu ma'asav b'chol Yisrael, mipnei richuk moshvaseim. Sorry, one second. He says, what is applicable in our town has no bearing on you in another town. And therefore he says, so you can't come along and say, Sfardim, you have to listen to the Ashkenazim. They're so far apart. Now, so what? Is that just a function of distance? If we're all in one big country, but it's the same distance apart, how do you explain that? So what the Rambam says, and it ties into the Kesef Mishnah, is that where nowadays certainly rabbinic authority stems from? Because everybody agrees to it. We're sitting in our town, we have elected the rabbi. We were makabel him as our rav. So therefore what he says goes. He gave the psak, that's the psak. The next town over, they didn't accept him. So what authority does he have? Nothing. That's like the Kesef Mishnah told us, the relationship with the Tanaim and Amoraim. The Amoraim are not bound to the Tanaim. They chose to be bound to them. This is going to be exceedingly important nowadays. Because what the Rambam is telling us is, and the Rambam, this reflects in Hilchos Mamrim, in source number 13, we won't read inside, but what the Rambam is telling us then is that rabbinic authority can come from a number of places. It can come from a pasuk lo sasu, the Sefer Chinuch. You must listen even nowadays to the broadest mandate possible. Maybe the Ran, maybe the Rabbanon. It could also come from the fact that you've agreed to listen to them. You've recognized them as leading authorities. And if you recognize them as leading authorities, so what they say is binding. And it's not necessarily tied to geographic location, but that's just the simplest way in 500 years ago to relate to this. But in theory, I could have someone who lives 500 miles away, who I've never met before, but I was makabel. They are my Rebbe. They are the leading light. So what they say goes. And even if I'm not obligated from the perspective of lo sasur, because that's only the Bezdin Yerushalayim, but still what they say goes. Okay.
I'm wondering, is it possible that, so in the case of, for example, the context of the question is that, like, in the case of Rosh Hashanah, if the Jewish people decided that it was the new year, the new calendar, that Hashem kind of bends reality to meet that accepted belief, that that is now the calendar, I'm giving it to you, to the people. Could the same principle be applied here where even if, say, the Amoraim had a technical idea that might really be able to compete with the Tana, that because they accept the Tanaim, that Hashem bends reality or updates reality such that what the Tanaim say really is the truth, even if the Amara has such a compelling argument.
If I paid attention long enough to follow, short memories, short attention span. I think you said two different things. I want to clarify. One is Hashem changed the reality, and Hashem made it true. That's not the same thing, right? Hashem could if we're talking about the moon's alignment, so we might say, well, Hashem made it that the moon switched, jumped over a spot, even though it shouldn't have been there. Or we might say Hashem created a reality where even though the moon is supposed to be here, but it's over here, that's called over here. That's two different things, right? Which, depending on which approach you take, I think could be relevant here as well. In other words, is it that Hashem is saying, well, that is the that is the physical correct, or metaphysically we're going to consider it as if it's correct? But the comparison I think is an absolutely appropriate comparison. I think that we need to analyze that sugya a little bit more. Okay? Yeah.
One like major question around accepting Das Torah that you presented, like I guess it's coming up now talking about people far away, but we said before that Rav Dessler could have answered the question by saying maybe the Chachamim have certain like siyata d'shmaya that we have to listen to them in this area, but we don't have to listen to them in this area. And then we also saw the Chofetz Chaim that like unless they have complete undiluted Das Torah with nothing bad mixed in, that it's not considered like true. I guess maybe we would say like binding Das Torah. It's not local to just this geographic question, but like I guess those two ideas are still like bothering me a little bit as far as like listening to Das Torah, because how do you know if a particular rabbi, as big as he is like undiluted by anything negative, and that he also has siyata d'shmaya in areas relevant to your life?
So I don't know, but what I would suggest is the approach we saw before from the Sefer Chinuch. Best bet. I can't guarantee that this is right, but best bet. What are the odds that he's got it right? I hope they're pretty good. I've heard about him. I've seen him. I've spoken to him. I could do the same thing, but if I have to hitch my horse to a wagon, he seems like a pretty good bet. More than that, I can't guarantee anything. Right? So I think the point of Rav Dessler is not saying that necessarily a gadol is telling you what is going to happen for sure 100%, but it's the best bet. Right? That's the approach I would take.
If it's the best bet, and we trace it all the way back to what the actual mitzvah is, then does that still fit the boundaries of the machlokas that we described earlier? That like it's deraisa according to the Sefer HaChinuch to take the best bet, or because it's only a best bet in our generation? No.
I think personally that the hashkaf of the Sefer HaChinuch is describing is applicable across the board. The Rambam could accept that as well. He just doesn't apply it necessarily in the same way, but halachically.
Can you explain that a bit?
Yeah. The fact that the Sefer Chinuch gives us hashkafic understanding of this mitzvah, I think, can jive with what the Rambam says. The Rambam says it's only talking about the Bezdin Gadol, so why should we listen to the Bezdin Gadol? Same hashkafa. Now the Rambam might say halachically that's not applicable nowadays, but the hashkafa is still applicable. Meaning the idea that best bet that's still applicable nowadays.
But you would not be obligated, and it would just be the right thing to do.
Right, exactly. Excellent. That's exactly what I wanted to get to. I gave you a letter here in source 25, printed in the back of the Tanya. The Baal Tanya says, let's jump to the second line, source 25. Mimos olam v'yeh eifo matzasam. Where did you ever find minhag zeh be'echad mikol sifrei chachmei Yisrael harishonim v'achronim? Where did you ever find? Give me any source, says the Tanya. Lios minhag v'asikin lishol be'etza gashmias kedas malas b'nyan olam agashmi aflo gdoli chachmei Yisrael harishonim ketanayim v'amarayim. Where do you find ever that you ask the Gedolim what color you should paint your house? Says the Tanya, it doesn't exist. So I don't know what's going on over here, says the Baal Tanya, that you're asking me what color to paint my house. We don't have any source for that. What did you just mention, Josh? Sorry.
That in our generation it might be the best thing to listen to Chachamim, but not be obligated.
No. After that, you said something very good. I want to come back to. Okay, so we'll play back the tape. There's a story they say about Rabbi Schneider. Now, when Rabbi Schneider got engaged or first married, I don't know, to his wife, he said to her, "Honey, here's how we're going to have perfect shalom bayis. Whenever it comes to anything in the realm of Gashmias, it's your decision. Whenever it comes to the realm of Ruchnias, my decision." So she says, "Deal." Beautiful. And he says, they fought like cats and dogs all the time. Why? She said to him, like, how can you do this? This is a Ruchnias, this is a Gashmias decision. So the Rav Shlomo said, I never saw a pure Gashmias decision. Every Gashmias is the Ruchnias as well. The reason that I think that story is important is because when it comes to the idea of Das Torah, of Gedolim, so there's different types of questions we can ask. Which color is going to, bring out my eyes the best? To me, it doesn't seem to have any value in the realm of Ruchnias, personally. I hope that's not offensive to anyone.
But the answer's white.
I didn't say shirt. As opposed to, maybe let's think about something like medical treatment. So, how do I diagnose this? I'm looking at an X-ray, I'm looking at a CAT scan. Okay, how do I diagnose this, doctor? Great. That's not a rabbi question. That's not a Gadol question. Okay, now we've diagnosed it, and there's two options for treatment. Treatment number one, quick in and out, but it'll be grueling, it'll be painful, it'll cost your entire fortune. Option number two, slow, won't cost you a fortune, but this will be a drawn-out process, 2 years. Okay, what should I do? Doctor, tell me. Is that a doctor question? Well, I don't understand. That's a question which involves weighing values. It's a value judgment, not a localized question, but a medical issue. We know the medical information. Now we have to assess the values. So how do I weigh values? Values are, so this is, very Salanter. Is this a Gashmis question? What's my medical treatment? No, this is not a Gashmis question. This is intertwined, Gashmis and Ruchnias. Because let's say I go with the quick option. They say, when I was a Talmud in Mir Yeshiva, so Rav Dustin Tzvi Finkel was the Rosh Yeshiva. Dustin Tzvi had Parkinson's, and he refused to take the medication because it would affect his learning. Is that a medical question? That's a Ruchnias question. So I could go down this path of treatment. It'll be grueling. I won't be able to learn for 3 months. It'll wipe out all my savings. What's going to be with my kids? Will I be able to support them? Will they have a father? Will they have a mother? I remember when I was in high school, I had a friend whose father was very sick, and the mother and the father flew to Eretz Yisrael for 9 months. Left the teenagers home alone. Mamish, home alone. Imagine your teenagers home alone for 9 months. Your parents are in a different country, and this is like pre-WhatsApp or anything. Party central. So I'm not judging a good decision or a bad decision. That's a value call, right? That's a Das Torah question because there's values at play over here, as opposed to just what is the appropriate treatment? What are the studies?
Rabbi,
Yeah.
I'm missing why you're all like immediately labeling that a Das Torah question.
Because Das Torah, I would define as let's leave aside the losasra I'm halachically obligated to, but it's expression of what does Hashem want, taking into account the totality of a Torah system. So that would be my working definition of Das Torah. Don't I want to have the values of Torah impact in decisions that I make when there are value calls? I would think yes. Does that mean it's psak, it's binding? No. And therefore, coming back to Rav Dessler. So did the Gedolim get it right? Right. Let's go back to the question of should we leave Europe and go to America? So is that purely no? We're looking at this at we wouldn't have been in Hitler's crosshairs, but there was another question going on right there. What's going to be with the Ruchnius in America in the 20s? What yeshiva are you going to send your kids to? None. There's no yeshivas. Which Beis Yaakov are you going to send to? None. Which summer camp are you going to go to? None. So is that a Ruchni? Is that a Gashmis question? Where is it safer? Well, there is an element to that. No, they weren't dealing with Hitler, but pogroms. But there's another question of Ruchnius over here. So as long as we're not going to push the infallibility angle, so isn't that Das Torah in terms of we want to incorporate values into this? That seems perfectly reasonable in my estimation, at least. The Rambam, I'll just read you a Rambam, it's verse 27. The Rambam says, Shloshein HaKofrim. There are three people who are heretics. Ha'omer she'ein Torah mi'im Hashem, if afilu pasuk echad, afilu teva achas, if you say any part of the Torah does not come from Hashem, even one letter. V'chein, just skipping a little bit, v'chein HaKofer b'perusha, if you deny any interpretation of the Torah, v'u Torah Shapell peh, fine, that would be Torah Shapell peh. And third, v'hamachchish magideha, and if you attack those that give over Torah. Soloveitchik made a big deal about this Rambam. One of the things that Soloveitchik was fanatic about was transmitting Masorah. And he made a big deal about the Rambam. I gave you the whole Rambam, we won't read inside. In source 28, in his part of that introduction to the Mishnah Torah, and I gave you 29, the piece from Rabbi Schneider, where he explicates this a little bit. Soloveitchik was obsessed with something called Chachmei HaMasorah. People who, their job, what they represent, is transmitting the Masorah. So what does it mean to transmit Masorah? So, it means to transmit pronunciation of words. It means to transmit certain piskei halacha. It means to transmit how we pass in certain shilas, the shach versus the taz. But says Rav Schneider, Chachmei Masorah are people who are totally enveloped in the world of Torah, that the glasses through which they look is Torah. That's what it is. They are transmitting that to the next generation. I would use that approach when it comes to Gedolim. What is a Gadol? So we have to have a tzaddik, and you have to have learning, and all the Gedolim stories are the same. But fundamentally, what is a Gadol? A Gadol is someone who views their life work to transmit Masorah to Klal Yisrael. Therefore, do they know 100%? They don't know 100%. But when it comes to questions which involve value judgments, so that is when we would want to bring to bear on that someone who has a broader perspective and a broad understanding of our values. What's our relationship with them? So going back to the Rambam, they asked Moshe Feinstein, how did you become the Posek Hadar? So Moshe said, because someone asked me, and they liked my answer, and then they told their friend, someone else asked me. Okay. The cynics say there's another reason that Moshe became so popular, because a lot of the shilas were about the kashrus of a chicken. So the minhag was that the Rabbanim would charge like a dime or something for every chicken you brought to them. And Moshe was free. So, the free guy, everyone goes to the free guy. It's a good business model, maybe. But Moshe says, I don't know, why should everyone listen to me? They decided. That's what the Rambam, right? We decided to listen to Moshe Feinstein. We put him there. And so some people cynically say, oh, Gedolim, what does it mean to be a Gadol? Well, you decide he's a Gadol, therefore you listen to him. But if he doesn't, but people say that in a cynical way. But in a sense, that's true. We assign value to someone. That's what the Rambam says. Why do Tanaim Amoraim not argue in Tanaim? They accept it upon themselves. So when we accept someone upon ourselves as a figurehead, as a representative of something, so then that becomes a Gadol b'Torah that represents Torah values, and therefore when I want to push forward and incorporate and think about decisions, that is a valuable thing. Like going back to the Balatani said, what are you doing asking me what color to paint your house? But painting the house is going to be important because we're trying to figure out, when we bring in kiruv trips, what's going to be the most inviting color? Well, then there is an angle of that to Ruchnis already. So it's a little bit. Now you might say, come on, the kiruv trips aren't going to care so much. Maybe not. I don't know. But at least you could sweeten the question a little bit in such a way that it does become relevant. Okay, let me just try and put this together, what we've spoken about. A lot of ideas. No, give me 2 minutes, just to kind of summarize. And it's hard to compete. Sandwiched between Rav Haber and dinner is really like an undesirable slot, especially if you can smell it coming in already. So let's try and summarize what we spoke about. Not necessarily any conclusions, other than whatever I say is dastara. But we have a pasuk which provides us with a mitzvah saseh, a mitzvah lo saseh, a machlok tzushonim. Who does that apply to? The Rambam, only the Sanhedrin, the Sefer Chinuch, every generation. To what areas does it apply to? Very limited, classic Torah, let's call it, versus a much broader mandate. Does that obligate us nowadays? We spoke about the question of what is Das Torah, who has Das Torah, the question of Chacham Adif Minafi. What does that exactly mean? Is it because he worked harder? In which case, okay, so he works hard, I work hard. Is this more rooted in some divine assistance that he has? He's closer to the truth. And then the last point we mentioned in terms of the Chachmei Masorah, the transmitting of our Masorah, and the idea of weighing, of incorporating that in our values, in our decision-making process when there is a conflict with our values and not simply a technical question. If the plumber says to you, should I use this pipe or that pipe? Most of us, I think, wouldn't have an opinion one way or the other, right? Mamish. But the second that the plumber says, well, this one, the aesthetics will be like this one will be like that. Oh, well, all of a sudden we have an opinion. Well, why? Because now it affects something else that's not just that technical area. That's the same thing when it comes to Gedolim, etc.